Hey guys, I've officially seen everything I was going to see at Edinburgh Film Festival, so here's reviews of the last two movies. The next movie I saw was Body at Brighton Rock, and it was kinda bad. For those of you who are unaware, this movie is the feature film directorial debut of Roxanne Benjamin, who before this has worked exclusively in horror anthology films. I've not seen VHS or Southbound, so I can't really comment on those, but I have seen XX, which I think is pretty awful, but Roxanne's short Don't Fall was easily the highlight of the movie. The short showed enough potential for me to be very much interested in what Roxanne Benjamin did next, and she made this. Admittedly, I was already kind of intrigued by this movie before I'd actually found out Roxanne was directing it, but once I found out, I knew I kinda had to see it. And just like Don't Fall, it's very clear from this movie that Roxanne Benjamin is a very talented director and someone who loves the horror genre. Easily the best aspect to this film is its stylistic approach. It's very much an homage to cheesy 70s and 80s horror movies. There is a synth throwback style kind of score and it's really great. Again, it is cheesy and homage as hell, but that is the entire point and I really enjoyed that. There are admittedly aspects to the film that look cheap, but there was clearly production value behind it in other scenes. There was clearly a lot of money put into making this movie look very 70s, 80s horror movie. The acting was fairly good for what they were going for the most part, although some of the performances could have very much been improved. From a visual standpoint, the film's pretty great for most of its runtime. Unfortunately, this film has some pretty big issues weighing it down. The first is surprisingly the tone. I mentioned that the film is very cheesy, but it only really embraces its cheesiness for the first third. After that, it starts treating itself like an actual scary horror movie, and it starts using modern horror movie cliches, but it's just as cheesy. There's lots of predictable jump scares. I mean, sure, they were executed better than the vast majority of jump scares, but they were still predictable jump scares. On top of that, the protagonist's stupidity reaches an entire new level. In the first third of the movie, it kind of felt like it fit her character because she was inexperienced with the route she's taking in the film, but then in the second and final third of the film, it just reaches whole new level of stupid. Any human being with genuine common sense would not do some of the things she does in this movie. It did not help that the protagonist's performance got worse the further into the film you got. Again, for the first third, her performance was actually pretty good, but the second and final, she did a pretty awful job. The film becomes so over-the-top ridiculous that it becomes unintentionally funny at points. The film has lots of noticeable continuity errors. The pacing was very bad and the film felt padded at times. I have a lot of respect for this movie, but it just isn't very good past the first third. Roxanne, again, very much has a lot of love for this genre, and she has a lot of potential in this genre, but she just needs better actors and maybe to get a different scriptwriter than herself. For a first feature, I'm pretty happy this turned out as well as it did, but it had so much potential to be so much better. If I'm being completely honest, I actually kinda preferred Don't Fall to this. But at the same time, this film is not going to deter me from keeping an eye on what Roxanne Benjamin does next. This director has a lot of potential, and I just think with a better script, then we'd actually get a pretty good film out of her. Check this movie out if you want, there's a lot going for it, it's got a great style, and if you like homage stuff, then you'll pretty much love the first third of this movie. And as annoyingly stupid as the protagonist is, it does fall into so bad it's good territory towards the final third. And hopefully if enough people support this movie, then Roxanne Benjamin can get some more money to pay for better screenwriters. I would recommend this overall, if not just to give Roxanne Benjamin some exposure, but keep your expectations low. And I'm giving Body at Brighton Rock a 4 out of 10. And finally I saw Firecrackers, and I liked it. This movie is kind of what I imagine the Life is Strange games would be like if I actually liked them. The main character is basically Chloe Price, but I was okay with it because this time they actually give her redeeming qualities and make her likable, and the actress playing her actually does a good job. All of the acting was pretty great, and my favorite performance came from the protagonist's mother. All of the characters were interesting and well defined, and while the premise of this film is not very original, its presentation and its writing really make it stand out. The film has some very nice framing, although I kinda wish it wasn't so shaky cam. If it just simply held onto a shot, then the film would look pretty great, but 9 times out of 10 the shot keeps on moving. Excluding the shaky cam, nothing about this film felt cheap despite the low budget. The film was pretty great from a lighting standpoint. I enjoyed the costume design, the sets were all great. There wasn't anything about the film that felt remotely fake. The dialogue was mostly good, although there were some scenes where it felt a bit forced. Some of the actions carried out by some of the characters in this film could have been better explained, and there was one by the protagonist which was just flat out bad. The protagonist Lou makes a lot of awful decisions in the film, but they at least feel in character and you can understand what drives her to make these decisions. But towards the end of the film, she makes one really awful and strange choice kind of out of nowhere. The usage of music in the film was either really effective or really detrimental. The editing could have been better. There are some scenes where the film is very noticeably dubbed. And while I like the ending of the film, it's a bit cliched. In the last 10 minutes it seemed like they were going to take a different direction from the average film with this type of premise, and I was actually kind of interested. And the film builds to a point where they could literally just end it and it would have had a subverted expectation style of ending, but then they do the thing you're expecting from the very start of the movie. Again, I like the ending to this film, it just felt a little bit obvious. Oh yeah, and they used the stupid, oh, these characters need to be arguing so we can transition into the third act cliche, except they use it twice and it is not to transition into the third act. One of the times it happens, it's around the middle of the second act and you're expecting the film to go faster, but it goes a lot slower from there on, and then one of the times is right before the end of the film. I'm glad they switched up where they placed it, and the way it was written was actually pretty effective, but I don't understand why it was in the film. It felt like a plot device, but it was never utilized. Overall though, I did like this film and I would definitely recommend it. I wouldn't even say all the issues I listed were that big. I mean, I wasn't going to detract any points for the ending being obvious. It's still a good ending. And I suppose by throwing me off, the film did in a way subvert my expectations. Either way, this film is very good and you should give it a shot when it gets its wide release. And I'm giving Firecrackers a 7 out of 10. Okay, I've seen everything I was going to see at Edinburgh Film Festival, so the channel is going to be a bit more normal now. That being said, I am working on some bigger videos at the moment, so throughout July, expect some of that kind of stuff. That is, if it gets past copyright. Anywho, that's the end of this video. Like, share, subscribe, I'm bad at outros, and I'll see you whatever I do next.